Good Saturday morning, everybody. It is great to be with you today. I have with me just one book that I'd like to read today, but it's one of my favorite Bible stories because it says so much about the power of God and how great He is. It also says a lot about His promises and the fact that when He tells a promise, He's going to keep it every single time. Sometimes we make a promise and things change, and we mean to keep our word, and we don't mean to tell a lie, or, we want to carry through with the promises that we make, but sometimes we're just hindered from doing that. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. That never happens with God. God can look all the way into the future, and He knows exactly what's going to happen. And so when He makes a promise, He's going to keep it every single time. Well, here's an example of God keeping His promise. You remember to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, God promised that Abraham's descendants would inherit the land of Canaan. Well, it was hundreds of years later, but God kept His promise. He didn't tell Abraham when they were going to inherit the land, but He said they were going to, and that's exactly what happened. But it happens in the book of Joshua, and the very first event in the book of Joshua, once God's people cross the Jordan River and get into the promised land, one of the very first things they do is fight in Jericho. And so today, I just want to be reminded of what happened at Jericho and think about the power of God. My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. Well, in Jericho, that's where we find God showing His power. All right? So I love this story, and I want to share it with you today from this little book. All right? The Fall of Jericho. For many years, the people of Israel lived and worked as slaves in Egypt. A leader named Moses saved them. He led them out of Egypt. God had promised the people of Israel that they would return to their home in Canaan. Canaan lay to the east of Egypt. They would have to travel a long way to reach this promised land, and they were led first by Moses and then by a wise man named Joshua. For 40 years, Moses led the people of Israel through many lands. Moses died before they could reach Canaan. His place was taken by Joshua. To reach Canaan, the people would have to cross the Jordan River. After crossing the river Jordan, they would have to capture the city of Jericho. Jericho was in Canaan. The people who lived there were enemies of the people of Israel, and they would fight hard to defend their city, which was surrounded by strong walls. When Joshua and his people reached the river, Joshua made his plans. He sent 2 men to swim across the river and find a way into the city. "Find out all you can about the city and come back quickly," said Joshua. Nobody saw the men as they slipped into the city at night. They wandered around, taking care not to be seen by any of the soldiers or the king of Jericho, and it did not take long to see that it would not be easy for Joshua and his army to capture Israel. They happened to meet a woman named Rahab, and Rahab let them stay in her house. Now, Rahab believed in the God of Israel. "God gave this land to the people of Israel," she said. "I will help you." The king of Jericho learned about the 2 men in Rahab's house, and he sent soldiers to capture them. Rahab heard that the soldiers were coming, and she hid the 2 men on the roof of her house, and then she waited for the soldiers to arrive. Now, when the soldiers came, Rahab said, "The 2 men have left my house. I don't know who they were." The soldiers went back to the king. That night, Rahab went up to the roof, and she took a red rope with her. The 2 men were waiting for her. "Climb down this rope to the street," she said. "Leave the city as quickly as you can." Rahab told the men she was afraid that her family would be hurt when Joshua's army captured Jericho. You know what they said? They said, "Tie this rope to your window after we have gone." "We will tell Joshua about the red rope," said the other man. "No man of Israel will harm your house and your family." The 2 men slipped to the ground. They managed to get out of the city in the darkness. They went back to Joshua. "Many of us will be killed if we attack that city," they told Joshua. Well, first, said Joshua, we must cross the river Jordan, and then we'll think about the city. God had spoken to Joshua. He told him how the people of Israel would cross the river, and Joshua gave the order to march forward. The priests led the way, and they carried the golden ark. The ark was a large box with 2 flat stones inside it. The 10 Commandments were carved on the stones. The people of Israel came to the river, and Joshua said to the priests, "Walk across the river." Walk across the river? You know what happened? The water was deep. The priest stepped forward, and then something wonderful happened. The river stopped flowing. The riverbed dried up. There was no water in the river. "It is God's work," said Joshua, and all the people crossed to the other side. You remember when they left Egypt, they had to cross the Red Sea. And remember the walls of water on either side, and they walked on dry land? Same thing happened then when they enter into the land of Canaan. The Jordan River stopped flowing, and they walked across on dry land. They took all their food, their sheep and cattle, and everything they owned with them. As soon as everyone had crossed, the water started to flow again. The people praised God. Joshua and his people marched a long way to Jericho. They stood looking at the strong walls of the city. "There's no chance of breaking through those stone walls," said one of Joshua's men. "It'd be foolish to try and attack that city." Joshua smiled when he saw that his men were afraid. "Do not be afraid," he said. "God has told me what to do. The women and children will stay here in camp. All the men will follow me. 7 priests must march with us." Joshua said, "Each priest will carry a trumpet. 4 other priests will carry the ark behind us." And then Joshua rode forward. You know what they did? Every day for 6 days, the army marched once around the city. The priests blew their trumpets, but the 7th day was different. That day the army marched around the city 7 times. Then Joshua cried out, "Now shout!" Everyone shouted. The walls of Jericho fell down with a crash. The people of Israel rushed into the city. As promised, Rahab and her family were not harmed, and now the people of Israel could go home. Isn't that a neat story? The walls of Jericho came crashing down. God kept his promise. The people of Israel were able to enter into the promised land, and Joshua led them in, and God was with them all the time. Could they have made those walls fall down on their own? No. God was with them, and God helped them. And I want to remind you today that God is always with you. That you never need to feel alone. You never need to feel like you can't do something, because God is always with us, isn't he? The same God who made those walls of Jericho come crashing down is the same God that you and I serve today. So young people, think about him today. Think about how powerful he is, how strong he is, and let us not get worried about this life, because God is with us and he's going to help us always. Now, I hope you think about that today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll look forward to being back with you next time. Okay? Lord willing, be good, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.